Oh boy, it's a new year, 2024. Good afternoon, good evening to some of you. I am Reverend Mark Hughes. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and you've caught me again on Juxtaposition this evening. It is January 10th. We're live at 525 Vermont Racial Justice Alliance monthly community television program on CCTV, the Center for Media and Democracy here at Town Meeting TV. Issues affecting Black folks and Black folks affecting change. That's what we're here for. That's what we do. And I, my friend, am unapologetically Black. So here we are. Tonight, the episode today I have for you is one word. It is demographics. Demographics is what I said. Demographics. I picked up on that word this week. I want to give a shout out to the governor. Thanks for the word. Thanks for the throw out for the word. Demographics. That's a word that I've been struggling with. I think over the last few days, I've heard it quite a few times. Demographics is defined as statistical data relating to the population of particular groups within it. And this is also an Oxford Dictionary definition. So no mas, I didn't do it. So here's the thing, though, with systemic racism and the work that we do in addressing systemic racism. I'm going to throw you a slide up just to remind you what that was. The work that we're doing to address systemic racism, this is essentially, if you just take a quick peek at this, I'm going to leave it up for about 20 seconds or so, is a political and economic divide along racial lines. Now, again, it's a political and economic divide along racial lines. Thanks for that slide. So mitigating systemic racism is what we're here to do. But what that requires is it requires us to measure various outcomes of race, population, demographics. So that's why when the governor, when he opened up his state of the state with the word demographic, you could only imagine my excitement. I was just like, yay, governor, go. But here's the rest of the story. So what the governor was talking about is he did throw out some pretty cool numbers, and there was some demographics that were out there. I think it was a total of maybe about 90,000 folks that he covered. And in all fairness, this is actually moving forward, so I appreciated it. I think it was 14,000 school-age folks were lost in the state. I don't know over what duration. I think it was 28,000 folks in their prime. I think it's like 40 to 54. This is work. It's all about labor. This is work age folks. And then, of course, 48,000 folks were added to the retirement rolls. That's what he was talking about. I was excited because I wanted to talk about demographics as it pertains to race, because obviously you can't really get after systemic racism unless you're looking at numbers. And that political and economic divide along racial lines is certainly something we want to get at. And what's that all about? Here's another slide. This is briefly just on some just trying to get our heads around, what is this thing about demographics? We start with census data. I mean, you can't understand things like poverty and just so you can, as you look at this slide, what we're seeing here is that first you see a percentile, and that is the percentile of that particular demographic, whether they are poor or so 33% of whites are poor in America. That makes up 67,000 people, and the list goes on. And again, that's the souls of poor folks. Demographics is all about numbers. Okay, so I think that's what I get excited about. That's what we should all get excited about as we're doing the work in the state. And I've just pulled these off of our website, some numbers for you. Some numbers, just articulating where we're having some challenges, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Because if we're able to take a look at numbers, then we can baseline racial demographics. and in the state. You know, we can baseline some of these numbers that are coming out of there. This last slide that I'll show you for now this one is all about wealth in America. And as I've told you before, thanks for that slide. Here in America, the median wealth of a white family is 13 times that of a black family. So as we're doing the work here in the state of Vermont, especially given the fact that the state of Vermont is about, here's a demographic, 1.4% black, 1.4 to 1.5% black. Interestingly, nearly 15 years ago, it was 0.4% black and white. And those numbers are important. They're important in the work that we're doing. Baselining racial demographics is important. Measuring quantitative, adverse, racially disparate outcomes produced institutionally and across social determinants is important. Conducting quantitative and qualitative comparative and trend analyses is important. Informing mitigation strategies, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're here to do, right, is to address systemic racism, identifying and addressing, obviously, or repairing, if you will, the harm that's caused by historical oppression. After all, as you see on this slide right here, we did pass a joint resolution back in 2021 committing to coordinating work and participating in ongoing action grounded in science and data to eliminate race-based health disparities and eradicate systemic racism. We also said that we were going to commit to a sustained and deep work of eradicating systemic racism through the state by actively fighting racist practices and participating in the creation of a more just and equitable system, or systems rather. Thanks for that slide. So yeah, there's a lot to get excited about, when the governor, started mentioning demographics. Unfortunately, that really wasn't what he was talking about. There was some conversation though, however, about public safety. And obviously, as a black man in Vermont, in the juxtaposition, no pun intended, created, that are with the counter-opposing gravitas that law enforcement and the civil rights movement and black people in America have had since slave catching, and just this problematic challenge that every time we get to a point to where we want to address public safety, it seems like when the pendulum swings, it really wreaks havoc in black communities. And that's not inexplicable. We can have another program on that, but we won't get into it. But it's good that we are having that conversation, as well as the conversation on affordability, because we already talked about the wealth gap here in the state of Vermont. And of course, housing is so incredibly important. I did catch the press conference today. It's good to see that there's a collaborative effort, a bipartisan, tripartisan effort coming together across the state around housing. And I think at the heart of that conversation is actually, I think, is Act 250. And one of the things that we'll talk more about as we move forward, and later on I'll come back to a couple of other slides, but for now, I wanted to just spend the rest of the time together just talking a little bit about Act 250 and also where we're going with it. Now, here's the thing. I got before we go much further, I've got a brief video for you, and what this is going to be. You're going to see Chris Graff interviewing former Governor Phil Hoff. Check this out.
You started a project which has to be the most controversial, if not one of the most controversial things you did as governor, which was the Vermont-New York Summer Youth Project, which brought several hundred youths from Harlem to Vermont. Where did that idea come from?
From me. I conceived of the idea on a plane coming back from Washington after we had received an advance copy of the Special Commission dealing with the riots following the death of Martin Luther King. And I conceived the idea that we would bring black kids from impoverished area in Harlem, primarily Harlem, but also the Bronx, to Vermont and couple them with our own white kids in a variety of projects and begin the process of Vermonters coming to understand the race problems and the problems of unequal distribution of wealth in this country. And we did it, and it worked. It was a marvelous program. Unfortunately, it was very badly misunderstood by particularly working people here in the state of Vermont. They saw these black kids as an economic threat, which they were not.
It hurt you politically.
Indeed it did. Probably, coupled with the Irisburg affair, probably did more to finish me politically in terms of running for statewide office than any other thing.
Let's talk about Irisburg.
Okay.
Tell us the story.
Well, the first news of Irisburg is that there was a black minister who had moved into Irisburg, was living with a white woman. And some sort of redneck ruffian up there proceeded to go by their house one night and shoot at the house. There's no way that we could tolerate that, and I immediately involved the state police in investigating it. To make long story short, I'm afraid there was some latent racism on the part of the state police.
Well, you had a dispute in the handling of this with your own public safety commissioner.
Ultimately, I did. And I was left no choice but to discipline the Commissioner of Public Safety and some of the people who worked for the department. That went down hard. It was controversial, but ultimately it occurred. But out of that, coupled with the Vermont-New York Youth Project, I did myself a lot of political damage. I don't mind that. I think that's the price of political leadership.
Were you saying things that Vermonters didn't believe or they didn't want to hear?
Oh, I was saying things that people mostly didn't want to hear.
Okay, thanks for that. Wanted to just do a little bit of a backdrop, and what we'll do is we'll also have some. I think I may have another clip later on in this segment on what Dean Davis was saying during this time. But if we want to talk a little bit about Act 250, what I'd like to do is I want to just properly frame it. This consistent with some of the testimony that was offered when we first started talking about Act 250. Did you know that? Now, again, for those who don't know what Act 250 is, this is a land use policy statewide. 27 governor appointees, maybe 28. This has been in effect for over 50 years. So we know that we already understand, based upon our previous conversation, that black folks in America have 1/13 of the wealth of white folks. One of those reasons that exists is because of generational wealth, because the land and housing ownership has been sparse, and there's a whole reason for that. I may have a slide for you on that. I'll go looking for it in a little bit. The point I'm trying to make, though, is simply that we're talking about the late 60s. It's just very important that we focus on the fact that we're talking about the late 60s. If we're going to be examining any of this policy, it's important to understand to contextualize it. The other piece too is there's been a lot of work. Quite frankly, there's been a lot of work on addressing, I should say, at least with the mindset of reviewing Act 250. If I'm not mistaken, back about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a commission that was formed that went in to do a 50-year review on Act 250. I just want to pause there for a minute, take you to some of the things that create wealth in America. Whether it is from slavery to naturalization to removal, The Homestead Act gave away 270 million acres of land to white folks in America. We all know about redlining, transportation projects, Jim Crow laws, the New Deal, GI Bill. We could go on and on. So thanks for that slide. Just want to set the record straight on what we're talking about, because if we're talking about something as impactful as land use, what we're talking about is a statewide policy that determines who builds and who doesn't. And it's also economically driven. Those who are poorer are going to be less likely to be able to build, and therefore less likely to be able to come into the state. So again, we're back to NIMBY, not in my backyard. Very, very important that we contextualize some of this. Here, back to this 50-year review, you should know that I caught that 50-year review before it was released and sent a memo over to the chairs, and also with ANRC, some folks even in the legislature. They were unable to address it. Address what? There was not one word about equity in this report. 50-year report, and allegedly looking forward for 50 years. 50-year report, not one word. I want to go over to. I've got Governor Dean Davis. Check this out. This is what was going on.
You formed a commission, and that led to Act 250,
right,
which was passed in the 70 legislature. I guess what surprises me about the whole process is how easily this process was accepted by the Vermont voters.
Well, you must remember that the nature of the population of Vermont was changing at about that time. Just about the time that Phil Hoff came in as governor, we were getting a rapid immigration into the state of people from high-density areas, and many of them with backgrounds that were quite dissimilar to what we would call the ordinary Vermonter in those days. For instance, a lot of them were Democrats, and most of them were liberals, and they were the kind of people that had seen in the cities the poisoning of the streams, had seen the crowding, the unsafe conditions that existed as far as the distribution of sewage and that sort of thing, and they just hated the mess that this high-density type of construction had brought about. So they had a background that was different than the Vermonter in this respect. And with all these variable political backgrounds that I
Vermont
mentioned.
was changing.
Yeah.
Your administration's was changing.
So what else was going on? What else was going on in America? Again, we're talking about the creation of the largest land use policy in the state that has been driving the development. Keeping in mind, again, 1.4% of the population of this state are black people. We know that interstates were not making it into the state by the end of 69 or 1970. We know that there were riots in Harlem in 68, Dixmoor in 64, Watts in 65, Huff riots in 66, Hunters Point riots in 66, Benton Harbor in 66 and 67 in the long hot summer, Atlanta, Boston, Buffalo, Cairo, Cincinnati, Detroit, Milwaukee, Newark, all across the United States. And I could go on and on. Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, riots all over the United States, civil rights, unrest all over the United States. And it just so happens that here in the state of Vermont in 1969, the highest priority of the newly elected governor, a former CEO of National Life Group, happens to be this. And yeah, there's a different type of people, I guess is what he was saying, that are kind of not Vermonters. So just to let you know, we did testify in 2019 in committee. I know Michaela Osler came in with some strong testimony, part of her dissertation. She spoke a little bit about these two. She spoke about the Irisburg event. She talked a little bit about Act 250 in general. So I won't go into her testimony right now. We also offered testimony in resources, in House resources in 2019. Just to let you know, as a part of that testimony, what we were able to get in is some significant recommendations towards what we might do on addressing Act 250, because we had to try to head it off in committee. The impacts of racial equity was Section 13 of the intended policy. We provided several recommendations to implementing measures to address the impacts of, or to investigate, to analyze the impacts of Act 250 and to address them, to include appointing the Executive Director of Racial Equity in cooperation with the Racial Equity Advisory Panel and the Human Rights Commission to conduct a comprehensive review of processes. This never made it into the policy that crossed over into the Senate in 2019. Therefore, it was dead on arrival. Recently, I was contacted. Do you like public radio, like the Vermont Public? I hope you do. It's great. I listen to it every morning. Shout out Michaela. Definitely want to. Mitch Wortley. You guys can all y'all get shout outs on my watch. But Brave Little State is what I want to talk about, because you'll see credits on Brave Little State on Act 250. You're going to see my name for credits. You're also probably going to see my wife's. When you listen to the whole thing, ask yourself the question why, because you won't hear or see me in the in any of the segment whatsoever. Why is that? So I provided this and more to them in an effort to get some additional information out on the harm that Act 250 probably did. Now, to be clear, we believed, and it's entirely possible, and I don't think there are some who are just coming around, that Act 250 contributed to the lack of diversity that's in this state today. I'm not saying it caused it. The other thing too is certainly that would also it would have also had an impact on economic equity, economic growth, as far as the ability for black folks to own property over a period of time. So that's the challenge. Why is this important? I'm glad you asked. The reason why it's important is because what we want to be doing is we want to be addressing the harm that we've done. So one of the things that is important here, I'm going to pull another slide up for you, see if I can give you a view of that, is that, there it is. I think this is a United Nations slide. It says that the transatlantic trade in Africans, enslavement, colonization, colonialism were a crime against humanity. And they go on to say, they speak about addressing with reparatory justice. It's good that there's work being done on this housing front. It's very, very important. It's important that Act 250 play a role in it as well. But if you think about it, this is a classic example of exclusionary policy. And this exclusionary policy, what it did is something so incredibly harmful, it's entirely almost impossible to articulate. And this is status quo for harmful exclusionary policy. When you create harmful and exclusionary policy, at the end of the day, inevitably, it will come back and it will hurt all of us. And this is just an important lesson for all of us to take away from this. I know that everybody's busy, and I agree that housing is important, and I'm not in opposition of the work that's being done towards it. And I think it's incredibly important that we do it all together, tripartisan. But we can't be in so much of a rush that we overlook how we got here in the first place. Because if we overlook how we got here in the first place, then we're not going to be able to identify the harm that has been actually done and actually go back and cure the harm and address the harm. So incredibly important. So as we're moving forward, and you think about this exclusionary policy, here's the harm. What it did is it stifled our growth as a state. Right now we're at right about 645,000 people or somewhere around about that demographics. So in stifling that growth, if you look at, again, demographics, about 14.3% of the population of the United States is black. And 1.5% or 1.4% of Vermont is black. If you bring in 100,000, it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that that is going to increase the diversity in this state. Now, had we done that 50 years ago, it also doesn't take a statistician to figure out the fact that there may have been black folks who would have been able to acquire and own property and hold it. Not just one family like the Clemens Farm, but many families across the state. So here's the damage. The other thing too is when we think about growth, that exclusionary policy, because we weren't able to grow, it also stifled our economic growth as a state as well. So the governor says it well, and I agree, Phil. We don't need more taxes, we need more taxpayers. It's true. But in order to do that, what we have to do is we have to be able to attract those folks. We have to create policies. We always talk about welcoming, but the fundamental baseline policy of land use in our policy has never, in our state, has never been welcoming. So we've got, challenges with stifling growth, stifling the expansion of bringing black folks in the state. But we also have the linchpin is it shut down our growth in housing, which is why we are in this tragic position that we're in today. It was because of exclusionary policy. So it's time for us to address it, yes. But as we address it, let's not forget that what we need to do is we need to go back and address the harm that was done with reparatory justice. That's how we address this work. That's how we focus on demographics. Thank you all for coming, for showing up tonight. It's been so far it's been a great year. Very happy that we're here together. Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, this is a monthly community television program on CCTV, Center for Media and Democracy, town meeting TV issues affecting black and brown folks and black folks affecting change. Demographics, the juxtaposition. See you next time.